Laenor Velaryon paced beneath the vaulted ceiling of High Tide's great hall, his breath heavy with the weight of unsaid words. The sea wind rattled the window shutters, carrying the salty tang of Driftmark's shore. A single torch flickered in a wall sconce, casting dancing shadows across the polished floor. High above, the roof beams creaked like old bones under the gusts that whispered of secrets and unfulfilled promises. His cloak, pinned by the seahorse of his house, swayed with each restless step. In a corner, his sworn shield stood silent, expression caught between concern and duty. Laenor knew he should not keep the messenger waiting, but every moment that he lingered, he recalled that life was precious and ephemeral. It was not so long ago that he had contemplated a desperate ruse to vanish from the world entirely. Yet he had turned away from that path. He could still remember the night he first heard whispers of a plan to fake his death. The notion had come on the wings of conspiratorial hush, shaped by those who meant to protect him. He had listened with a hollow heart as Demon Targaryen spoke of a boat to Essos, of a new name, of freedom from the labyrinth of obligations that tethered him to a wife he barely knew and a realm he struggled to love. But when the time to decide arrived, Laenor had found himself rooted in place. He had knelt by the hearth in Rhaenyra's chambers, the firelight caressing her pale hair, and realized that he could not leave her to face the storms alone. The realm was swirling with tension. Alicent's faction in King's Landing, the uncertain health of King Viserys, the threat of further bloodshed over the question of succession. He might have found peace across the narrow sea, a new life unshackled. Yet he remained, and that single choice set many paths ablaze. Now, as he straightened his shoulders, he motioned for the messenger to approach. A young man in House Velaryon colors stepped forward, parchment in hand, the seal of Dragonstone visible even from a distance. The courier's eyes flicked to Laenor's armor, ornamental yet battle-worn. Laenor's face, set in determined lines, betrayed a flicker of curiosity. The courier bowed, then offered the letter. Laenor broke the seal, scanning the words by torchlight. His eyes narrowed. Rhaenyra requested his presence in King's Landing, for matters of urgent import that could not be delayed. The letter hinted at shadows in the court, at mounting tensions. She needed him by her side, and quickly. He remembered the vow he had made long ago, the vow to stand beside her when duty called. Regardless of their differences, the fragile tapestry of their union still bound them. Though their marriage had been more alliance than passion, they had formed a quiet camaraderie with the years. The realm was changing, and each ripple in the tide threatened to become a wave that could overwhelm them. He dismissed the messenger with a courteous nod, promising a swift departure on the morrow. Outside, the wind howled, and the seabirds cried, heralding a storm. If the realm was bracing for conflict, then Laenor would face it not as a ghost, but as a living man determined to protect what was his. Hours later, dawn spread across Driftmark's horizon, gilding the waves with muted silver. Laenor stood upon the docks, staring at the sleek ship that would bear him to King's Landing. To the east, a gull flew low over the churning waters, its lamenting call echoing in the hush of early morning. A handful of sailors, loyal men of House Velaryon, stowed cargo and readied sails. The day's breeze was cool against Laenor's cheeks. He tugged the collar of his cloak, a subtle weight of embroidered pearls and sea motifs that reminded him of his heritage. If ever there was a time to represent House Velaryon's might, it was now. His mother, Princess Rhaenys, approached him on the docks. She carried herself with regal grace, her dark hair braided and bound in a golden net that caught the sunrise. Worry etched faint lines upon her brow. "My son," she said softly, reaching for his hand. Their eyes met, and for a moment, all the tensions of the realm receded. In that single instant, they were only mother and child, the bond unbroken by politics or ambition. Rhaenys searched his face, and he sensed her relief to find him alive and whole. There had been a time, not so long ago, when the rumor of his death might have come to pass. He squeezed her hand, acknowledging that quiet fear. "We will make our stand," she said, her tone steadfast. "Driftmark stands with you, my son." You have a part to play in this, one that only you can fulfill. The future is uncertain, but do not forget that our blood runs true. The Velaryons have always borne the sea's storms with honor." Her voice caught on that final word. They both understood the unspoken worry. King Viserys' illness, the Green faction's whispers, and the precarious position of Rhaenyra. Above all, the question of the Velaryon legacy weighed upon them like an anchor. Laenor nodded gravely. "I will sail within the hour," he said, his eyes lingering on hers. He wanted to promise her everything would be well, yet the realm had taught him caution. Instead, he kissed her cheek and withdrew, making his way up the gangplank. The sailors bowed to him and set to work. Ropes were loosed, sails were unfurled, and the sleek vessel glided away from Driftmark's harbor. Laenor stood at the prow, the wind ruffling his short hair, as the spires of high tide receded behind him. He wondered if he would return to these shores unscathed. He wondered if the choices he had made, choices that kept him alive and present, would prove a blessing or a curse. The journey to King's Landing stretched across 2 days of changeable weather. The ship encountered sudden squalls and lulls of dead calm, as though the sea itself mirrored the uncertainty raging in the realm. Laenor found solace in the deck's steady roll beneath his feet. He had always felt more at ease at sea than in gilded courts. The open water did not demand fealty or cunning. It simply was. Yet his mind wandered often to the Red Keep, to the labyrinthine halls where Alicent's faction tightened its grip and Rhaenyra fought to assert her inheritance. When the city's walls and towers finally emerged from the haze, Laenor felt his chest tighten. The Red Keep loomed atop Aegon's high hill, its crimson stones bathed in the golden rays of late afternoon. Banners of green and black flickered here and there, an uneasy mingling of sigils. The harbor bustled with ships, each bearing colors from across Westeros. The golden roses of Highgarden, the flayed man of House Bolton, the lion of Lannister. The realm, it seemed, was gathered here to witness a shifting tide. Laenor disembarked, cloak swirling around his ankles, eyes scanning the crowd for a welcoming face. He found a half-dozen knights from Rhaenyra's guard waiting at the docks. At their head stood Ser Eric Cargill, who offered a polite bow. "Prince Laenor," he said formally, though the faintest edge of relief tinged his voice. "Her Highness bade me greet you. We have horses ready. The princess awaits in her private chambers." Laenor offered the man a curt nod, trusting that Rhaenyra had chosen him for his discretion. Without another word, he allowed himself to be led through the throngs of onlookers, who craned their necks to glimpse the son of the sea snake. Rumors always clung to the living, especially one presumed dead more than once by gossiping tongues. Laenor steeled himself as they approached the Red Keep's gates, surmising that illusions of stability would soon fade in the face of the truths within. He traversed winding corridors that smelled of incense and old stone. At last, he reached Rhaenyra's chambers. The guards at her door stepped aside. Inside, he found her perched near a table strewn with parchments. Her silver-gold hair was braided back from her face, accentuating the sharp lines of her cheekbones and the determination in her gaze. She looked up as he entered, and a rare flash of relief passed across her eyes. Their marriage, though never a romance for the ages, still held a bond forged by mutual understanding and a shared sense of duty. "I'm glad you came," she said, voice tight yet sincere. She gestured for him to sit. "I feared that you might have chosen otherwise." Laenor remained standing a moment longer, scanning the chamber. The windows were shuttered, candles flickering. There was a tension in the air that even thick stone walls could not stifle. He let out a breath and removed his riding gloves, setting them on the table. "I made my choice long ago, Rhaenyra. I will not run." That was the crux of it, truly. A vow that the illusions of safety beyond the seas were not worth abandoning his name or the realm that needed him. She inclined her head, acknowledging the significance. "We must stand together," she said, pushing aside a parchment that bore the seal of the hand of the king. "The alliances we form in the coming days may shape generations. My father is weaker than ever. His council is divided. Alicent's faction grows bolder, pressing for Aegon's claim. Daemon remains watchful, but he has his own maneuvers in motion. We have precious few we can rely upon. Her tone grew soft. I need you, Laenor. We must show the realm that House Velaryon and House Targaryen stand united. Laenor caught the flicker in her gaze. She was not only speaking of political alliances, but of appearances, the illusions that their children were true-born Velaryons and not fathered by another. He swallowed hard. "What would you have me do?" he asked. She shifted a pile of letters aside, revealing a small map of the Crownlands, marked with tokens indicating troop movements and supply lines. House Hightower exerts its influence through the king's hand, Otto. They use the king's decrepitude to push their agenda. We must counter that influence. We have allies in the Riverlands who remain true to us, and the Vale is uncertain. If the Sea Snake and the Lords of the Narrow Sea stand firmly with us, it will bolster our claim. She met his eyes. I want you to speak before the court. Show them you are alive, well, and unwavering in your support. Silence those who claim I am alone. Laenor's stomach nodded. He had never sought the spotlight of courtly politics, preferring tournaments or the deck of a ship to the suffocating intrigues of the Red Keep. But he was no coward. A sense of purpose lit in his chest as he nodded. I will do whatever I must, he said quietly. Our house has never shirked its duty. That very evening, word spread through the Red Keep and beyond that Laenor Velaryon had arrived in the city. Tongues wagged in every hall, from the servants' quarters to the lords' feasting tables. Speculation flared anew. Many had thought him dead, or at least gravely endangered. The truth of his continued vitality undercut countless rumors. Alicent Hightower, upon hearing the news, allowed herself a single exhalation of frustration behind closed doors. She had hoped that Rhaenyra's position would be weakened without her husband's presence. Now the balance of court was shifting. Laenor entered the royal audience chamber the next day, standing tall beside Rhaenyra. An ailing King Viserys sat upon the iron throne, trembling hands gripping the arms of the seat. His breathing was labored, and sweat beaded on his forehead. Age and illness had carved deep furrows into his face, robbing him of the vigor he once possessed. Alicent stood close, her green gown a stark contrast to Rhaenyra's black garments. The court was assembled, knights and ladies, lords and courtiers, each peering with keen interest. The crier announced Laenor's presence, and a hush fell upon the chamber. Laenor stepped forward, ignoring the stares. He felt the press of eyes like a physical weight. Composing himself, he bowed low to King Viserys. "Your Grace," he began, voice carrying across the silent hall. "I have returned to King's Landing at the princess's behest, to swear once more my support to the crown and to you, my king." He kept his words measured, every syllable intentional. Viserys inclined his head, the crown sitting precariously upon thinning hair. His voice came as a faint rasp. "Lord Velaryon, it does me good to see you here, hale and loyal as always." He coughed into a kerchief, Alicent immediately hovering near. The king pressed on. "I have heard troubling rumors. Today, let all men see that House Velaryon and House Targaryen remain as one." A chorus of whispers ran through the crowd. Laenor scanned the faces and recognized wariness, doubt, and in some corners open relief. At the fringes of the hall, he caught sight of Daemon Targaryen, leaning nonchalantly against a pillar. Their gazes locked for a moment, and something flickered in Daemon's eyes. Approval, perhaps, or speculation. Nearby, Aemon Targaryen stood with a stiff posture, his single eye fixed on the proceedings, while Aegon slouched, expression unreadable. Helaena clutched her hands together, eyes flitting between the courtiers as though deciphering hidden patterns. As the short ceremony concluded, Laenor felt an undercurrent in the crowd, a shifting tension he could almost taste. The game was in motion. He had chosen to stay, to stand with Rhaenyra, and that choice would ripple outward in ways no one could foresee. After the court adjourned, Laenor lingered near the throne room entrance, letting the courtiers drift away in clusters. A voice at his shoulder murmured, "A brave show." He turned to find Daemon at his side, the rogue prince's silver hair and dark attire giving him a dangerous elegance. A wry curve touched Daemon's lips. "I must confess, I was uncertain if you'd appear." Laenor set his jaw, recalling that fateful night when Daemon had all but handed him the means to escape. "I do not run from my responsibilities," Laenor said. His tone was guarded. The man before him was both ally and potential rival to Rhaenyra's affections, a complicated figure who threaded himself through the princess's life. Daemon's smile deepened. "The realm is full of illusions, dear Laenor, but standing firm in one's own skin is admirable." He inclined his head, as though conceding a hidden truth. "For Rhaenyra's sake, I am glad you remain, if only to present a united front against the Vipers." His gaze flicked to where Alicent conferred quietly with her father, Otto, and several green-clad lords. Laenor nodded, refusing to allow the conversation to stray into the territory of regrets or half-spoken accusations about who had originally devised the plan for his disappearance. The realm was in peril. There were graver concerns than old tensions. In the days that followed, Laenor found himself immersed in courtly intrigues like never before. Rhaenyra consulted with him daily on matters of strategy, often alongside Daemon and Princess Rhaenys, who had made her own journey to the capital. The Sea Snake remained on Driftmark, ensuring the might of their fleet was ready should conflict flare. Yet Rhaenys brought word of subtle tensions among the Velaryon vassals, some of whom questioned their lord's ongoing loyalty to Rhaenyra. The rumor mills churned, painting pictures of an ailing king overshadowed by his queen consort, and of princess and prince who might be overshadowed by more cunning forces. Laenor took time to visit his sons, officially his, though fathered by Harwin Strong in truth, Jacaerys, Lucerys, and baby Joffrey. Each had grown in his absence. Jace, in particular, watched his father with a contemplative gaze, as though attempting to fathom the complexities that bound them. Laenor strove to show them paternal affection, aware of the rumors questioning their parentage. The boys seemed relieved to have him around, even if a certain unspoken distance lingered, born of uncertain truths. Still, he resolved to protect them. He might not have fathered them by blood, but they were Velaryon in name, and if the realm was to see a future under Rhaenyra's rule, their legitimacy must stand unchallenged. Night fell on King's Landing with a hush of anticipation. Laenor took solace on the castle battlements, looking down upon the labyrinth of streets lit by torches and moonlight. The flicker of distant lanterns shimmered on the Blackwater Bay. He recalled nights at sea, under starlit skies, where the world felt boundless and free. Here, the walls closed in, each corridor laden with spies, each banquet table a platform for hidden agendas. Yet he had chosen this path. He had remained. As the next moon waxed, King Viserys' health saw a marked decline. Word spread that his body wasted away from infections and rot that no maester could mend. He rarely left his bed, and when he did, it was only to appear briefly before the court, a shell of the man he once was. The Greens found fresh cause to assert their influence. Alicent oversaw the daily governance, supported by her father Otto, who held the post of hand. Aegon loitered in the shadows, half interested in the notion of kingship, half terrified. Aemond, grown bolder since claiming Vhagar, displayed open hostility toward any who supported Rhaenyra. Amid these mounting tensions, Laenor and Rhaenyra took to forging new alliances. They held feasts for prominent lords, especially those from the Vale and the Reach who had not fully pledged themselves to either faction. The more they showed a united front, the more it chipped away at the Greens' narrative that Rhaenyra stood alone. Laenor discovered a knack for disarming strangers with his genuine courtesy. He spoke of ships and trade routes, of shared prosperity once Rhaenyra ascended the throne. He wore his Velaryon pride openly, reminding the lords that they needed mastery of the seas. His presence lent credence to Rhaenyra's side in a way that rumors of his death never could have. Yet a seed of doubt grew within him, watered by each fleeting glance between Rhaenyra and Daemon. The two shared an understanding that went beyond politics. Laenor felt it in the room, as palpable as the salt in the sea air. Though no outright betrayal had occurred in front of his eyes, the knowledge that Daemon once proposed his disappearance, and that Rhaenyra had never openly condemned that plan, gnawed at him. But for the sake of the realm, for the sake of their mutual interests, he set those doubts aside. If war came, they would need every dragon, every ship, and every sword aligned. On a crisp morning, Laenor joined Rhaenyra in the royal gardens, accompanied by Rhaenys. The princess had arranged a meeting with a delegation from the north, House Manderly, represented by the corpulent Lord Desmond Manderly. The White Harbor contingent arrived wearing cloaks trimmed with ermine, signifying their wealth. Their mission was to evaluate the strength of Rhaenyra's claim. Lord Desmond greeted Rhaenyra graciously, addressing her as Princess of Dragonstone, then turned to Laenor with a respectful nod. "Prince Laenor, your father's fleets have always been a bulwark for the realm," Lord Desmond began, his jowls quivering slightly. "Our port city relies on trade as much as White Harbor prides itself on loyalty to the crown. We seek reassurance that, under Princess Rhaenyra's future reign, such trade will flourish." His gaze flicked to Rhaenyra, then back to Laenor. "I have heard many things whispered in the wind. Yet here you stand, hale and unbowed. That must mean something." Rhaenyra offered a diplomatic smile. "My husband's presence shows that the crown's lineage remains strong, Lord Manderly," she said, her tone measured. "I trust our mutual prosperity will continue, especially if we stand together against those who would splinter the realm." She gestured for him to sit, and servants brought refreshments of honey cakes and spiced wine. Laenor picked up the thread. "We understand White Harbor's position, my lord. Should the worst happen, my father's fleets will protect the trade routes. House Velaryon has ever been the shield of the narrow sea. We do not break our word lightly." Lord Desmond seemed mollified, but shrewdness sparkled in his eyes. "And if the king passes before matters are settled? The Hightowers claim that Prince Aegon has a more straightforward right, being the firstborn son. Forgive me, your highness," he added to Rhaenyra, "but the matter weighs upon every lord who must choose a side." Rhaenyra's knuckles whitened against the arm of her chair. "My father named me his heir. If we question the king's own decree, then we invite chaos upon the realm." Her voice held a quiet fervor. Laenor watched the interplay carefully, noting how Rhaenys observed Lord Desmond's reaction. The princess had been passed over herself for the crown in the Great Council of 101 AC, and the bitterness still lingered beneath her composed exterior. Lord Desmond hesitated, weighing the tension in the air. Finally, he offered a small bow of his head. "We have long memories in the north, princess. If we pledge ourselves, we stand firm. I look forward to further discussions on trade and security." With that, the meeting concluded, leaving a tenuous but promising thread of support. As the Manderlys withdrew, Rhaenys exhaled softly, turning to Laenor and Rhaenyra. "It bodes well that White Harbor is willing to listen. The North's loyalty can decide more than one conflict." Rhaenyra nodded, though a crease of worry marked her brow. "We must ensure the rest of the realm sees us in a similar light, capable, unified. We cannot allow the Greens to undercut us by sowing doubt." She glanced at Laenor. "Your presence, husband, remains invaluable." Laenor forced a smile. "I will continue to do what I can." Time moved slowly within the Red Keep, each day weighed down by tidings of Viserys' failing health. Laenor watched as the king's condition deteriorated to the point where he could scarcely sit upright. Alicent and Otto maneuvered carefully, hosting dinners and discreet meetings that excluded Rhaenyra. The tension among the royal children spiked. Laenor noticed how his supposed sons drew closer to their mother. Aemond, emboldened by his bond with Vhagar, made veiled threats in the training yard. Aegon, for his part, drifted in a haze of indulgences, though the rumor was that Alicent pushed him to take his duties more seriously. One afternoon, a violent altercation broke out between Jacaerys and Aemond during weapons practice, fueled by old grievances regarding the parentage of Rhaenyra's children. Laenor arrived to see Ser Criston Cole separating the boys, while Daemon looked on with a half-smile, as though amused by the aggression. Jace stood with a wooden sword in his hand, seething. Aemond nursed a bruise on his shoulder. When Laenor intervened, placing a calming hand on Jace's arm, He caught the venom in Aemon's glare. A bastard father defending a bastard son. Aemon hissed, voice low but audible. The remark cut deeper than Laenor expected. He refused to rise to the bait, but inside, a slow-burning fury took hold. "Mind your tongue," Laenor said, stepping protectively between Aemon and Jace. "Your uncle's patience is not infinite." Even that was measured speech. He wanted to strike the boy, to demonstrate that such words were poison. But violence here would only feed the Green's narrative. Aemon sneered, but his posture wavered under Laenor's gaze. Criston Cole lingered close, ready to shield Aemon, and in doing so, revealed where his loyalties lay. The moment stretched, pregnant with the possibility of drawing steel. Finally, Aemon turned on his heel and left the yard, muttering curses. Laenor exhaled, tension coiled in his muscles. He turned to Jace, whose face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. "You must remain calm," Laenor said softly to the boy. "They want to provoke you. Don't let them succeed." Jace's eyes glistened with frustration. "He has no right," the boy hissed. "He's the one who took Vagr. He's the one who—" The boy stopped himself, swallowing his next words. Laenor could see how deep these resentments ran. Blood feuds had begun over less. Daemon drifted closer, an air of nonchalance about him that did little to hide the glint in his eye. "Aemon is bold because the king grows weaker," Daemon said in a low voice. "He thinks he can flout courtesy without consequence." He paused, gaze flicking to Laenor. "Never forget how quickly a spark can become a blaze in this nest of vipers." Laenor's jaw clenched. "I have not forgotten," he said. He ushered Jace away, taking the boy to calm him with a short walk in the fresh air. The courtyard dust settled behind them, but the bitterness lingered. In the following weeks, the Greens began to openly question the line of succession, citing the realm's need for a male heir. Alicent invoked the faith of the Seven, subtly implying that a woman on the Iron Throne defied the natural order. Rhaenyra, though angered, focused on shoring up her supporters. She dispatched ravens to the Vale, the Riverlands, and Storm's End. Corlys, who still commanded the largest navy in Westeros, sent word that the Velaryon fleet was ready to blockade Blackwater Bay if needed. But the old sea snake advised caution. No one wanted to plunge the realm into civil war if it could be avoided. Laenor felt the strain on Rhaenyra. The two would speak late at night in her solar. She confessed her exhaustion, her fears that without her father's strong presence, the realm would fracture. Laenor would reassure her, but a part of him harbored his own concerns. He worried that the path they were on, with factions so deeply entrenched, would inevitably lead to bloodshed. Yet what else could be done? Fleeing to the Stepstones or setting sail for Essos was no longer an option. He had chosen to remain in Westeros to fight for their claim. One somber night, a hush fell over the Red Keep. King Viserys was on the brink of death. Courtiers were summoned to his bedchamber, where the king lay shrouded in blankets, breath ragged. Alicent knelt at his bedside, her eyes red with tears, though Laenor could not help but sense a resolve beneath her grief. Rhaenyra stood opposite, holding the king's other hand, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Daemon lingered near the foot of the bed, stoic. The Targaryen children were ushered in, along with a handful of trusted family members. Laenor hovered in the background, respectfully allowing Rhaenyra her final moments with her father. The king's eyes fluttered open, clouded with pain and delirium. His gaze flicked between Alicent and Rhaenyra. With his last ounces of strength, Viserys clutched Rhaenyra's hand, murmuring disjointed words about the prophecy of ice and fire, about the burden that came with Targaryen rule. His voice was so faint Laenor could barely distinguish the syllables. Finally, the king breathed his last, his fingers going slack in Rhaenyra's grasp. A wave of silence washed over them. The tension that followed felt like the stillness before a tempest. Outside the bedchamber, the Red Keep erupted into frantic motion. Alicent retreated with Otto, Aegon, Aemond, and Helena into a private council. Rhaenyra, Daemon, Rhaenys, and Laenor gathered their own supporters. Raven feathers and wax seals multiplied as messages flew to every corner of Westeros. The question of succession, once a simmering pot, now threatened to boil over. Laenor felt a chill of foreboding as he stood in a corridor with Rhaenyra. Her eyes were red, a combination of sorrow and fury. "We must act swiftly," she said, her voice hoarse. "They will try to crown Aegon before the sun rises. I have claim. My father named me heir in sight of half the realm. I will not let them steal my birthright." Laenor placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to anchor her. "We will not let them," he echoed. He could feel her trembling. "Daemon is rallying what loyal guards he can. Corlys is on his way. We must hold firm." A clamor rose from the opposite end of the hall. Ser Eric Cargill arrived, breathless, to inform them that Alicent and Otto had locked down the castle gates and were barring Rhaenyra's supporters from leaving. The council was convening to declare Aegon the new king. Fury flared in Laenor's chest. They had not even permitted the rightful heir to speak. Rhaenyra's face hardened. "We must escape the keep if they plan to seize me. We have allies in the city. Daemon can help us slip away, gather our forces at Dragonstone." Her voice shook, though her spirit did not. Laenor nodded. "We have to do this carefully. If we're caught, they'll imprison us, or worse." Thus began a frantic effort that very night. Servants loyal to Rhaenyra, or simply fearful of repercussions, assisted in smuggling her faction out of the keep. Rhaenys led the way for a small group, cloaked in darkness. Laenor gathered the children, Jacaerys, Lucerys, and Joffrey, along with Baela and Rhaena, Daemon's daughters. The corridors were a maze of flickering torches and hidden passages. All the while, bells told the death of the king, echoing through the fortress like a dirge for the realm. The plan hinged on evading guards loyal to Alicent. Daemon orchestrated diversions, picking fights in distant halls or bribing key watchmen. Laenor's heart pounded as he guided the children through a lesser-known corridor that opened to a servant's courtyard. A partial moon cast pale light on the cobblestones. In the distance, they heard the commotion of gates being barred. They mounted horses in haste, aided by Ser Eric. Rhaenyra arrived in disguise, accompanied by a handful of sworn swords. Laenor noticed her face, pale and resolute, illuminated by the moonlight. If the Greens sought to trap her in the keep, they would fail this night. The group rode out in a tight formation, slipping through an old postern gate that had not yet been closed. Once outside the walls, the darkness of the city engulfed them. Daemon, who had taken a different route, would meet them further along. Rhaenyra spurred her horse, and the children followed. Laenor rode close beside her, scanning every shadow for the glint of a crossbow or the flash of steel. The city's cobblestones rattled beneath their horses' hooves, and passing lamplight revealed shocked faces of common folk, some kneeling in the streets upon hearing the bells for the king's death. They reached the river gate leading to the Blackwater. Guards there recognized Rhaenyra's party but hesitated, unsure whether to obey the old order or the new. Laenor acted swiftly, invoking the name of Corlys Velaryon, and brandishing a sealed command that declared free passage for the princess and her retinue. Under threat of House Velaryon's naval wrath, the guards let them pass. Moments later, they arrived at the quays, where a fast ship awaited. Daemon appeared from the shadows, a half-dozen loyal knights behind him, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. Without delay, they ushered the children aboard. The sails were unfurled, and the vessel glided into the dark waters of the Blackwater Bay. Behind them, the Red Keep's towers stood like silent sentinels. The path to Dragonstone lay ahead, offering a temporary refuge and a staging ground for what would inevitably come next. As the ship swayed, Laenor found Rhaenyra leaning against the prow, staring back at the receding lights of King's Landing. She seemed like a marble statue, every muscle rigid. He approached, placing a careful hand on her shoulder. She did not pull away. In the distance, lightning flickered over the horizon, illuminating the waves. "They will crown Aegon tomorrow," Rhaenyra said quietly, her voice carrying an undercurrent of disbelief. "And then the realm will tear itself apart, unless we act." A tear slid down her cheek, but her eyes burned with anger. My father's death should have been a time of mourning. Instead, it's a time of theft. Laenor nodded, words failing him. He understood her pain, even if he could not fully share it. For all the realm's talk of lineage and prophecy, for all the times he had stepped up to defend Rhaenyra's claim, he could not erase the heartbreak she felt at her father's betrayal by his own wife and in-laws. "We will make for Dragonstone," Laenor said gently. "There you can be crowned in the sight of your loyal lords. The sea snake will bring his fleet to bear. The city might choose to bend the knee once they realize House Velaryon stands firmly with you." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "You think the Greens will allow that so easily? They will bring every resource to ensure Aegon's throne is secure. War is upon us, Laenor, whether we sought it or not." He said nothing, only drew her into an embrace. For a moment, she let herself lean against him, the weight of destiny pressing down. Daemon watched from the stern, his expression unreadable. The children huddled below deck, confused and afraid, uncertain what the morrow would bring. When the sun rose, they were well beyond the city's harbor, gliding over calm waters. Storm clouds gathered overhead, a fitting omen. Dragonstone appeared in the distance, its volcanic mountains spitting trails of smoke into the leaden sky. By midday, they docked at the old Targaryen stronghold. A swirl of black and red banners greeted them, knights and guards forming an honor guard as Rhaenyra disembarked. Laenor followed, guiding the children to safety. Inside the ancient fortress, they found a measure of relief, but also a solemn understanding of the battles ahead. That same day, ravens came with news. Aegon had been anointed at dawn in the dragon pit, crowned with the conqueror's crown in front of a throng of small folk. Alicent and Otto presided, calling upon the city to hail their new king. The bells tolled differently this time, not in mourning but in jubilation, though half the city was unsure what to make of the swift turn of events. While the new King Aegon stood triumphant, Rhaenyra was already being hailed by her supporters as the rightful heir, flying the banner of the Black Dragon. Targaryen faced Targaryen. The dance of claims had begun. Within Dragonstone's walls, Rhaenyra held her own coronation. Daemon placed upon her head a crown resembling the one worn by her father, but smaller and lighter, a testament to her lineage. Court was summoned in the great hall, and knights bent the knee. Laenor knelt as well, swearing his fealty anew, though once again, the moment bristled with complexities. He rose to see Rhaenyra's gaze sweep over those gathered, her posture regal, her will hardened by grief and fury. She was no longer merely Princess of Dragonstone. She was Queen Rhaenyra to all who followed her banner. After the ceremony, as trumpets echoed through the halls, Laenor slipped away to a balcony that overlooked the sea. He spotted the Velaryon fleet anchored in the distance. With the sea snake's arrival imminent, Dragonstone would become a stronghold of considerable might. Yet the knowledge that half the realm might stand against them weighed heavily on him. Alicent and Otto would never willingly relinquish the throne they had just seized for Aegon. As if conjured by his thoughts, Daemon appeared behind him. The rogue prince leaned against the stone balustrade, eyes studying the horizon. "The war is upon us. Rhaenyra holds Dragonstone, the Velaryon fleet, and at least half the lords who once swore to uphold Viserys' decree. The Greens have King's Landing, the royal treasury, and the Lannisters are rumored to support them. Dorne remains aloof. The Reach is split. The North and the Riverlands may come to us, if we move quickly. But alliances shift as easily as sand in the wind." Laenor nodded, his eyes fixed on the waves. "We must rally the realm to our cause. Rhaenyra's right is clear. Viserys named her. You know it, they know it. Yet they will question her children's parentage, call them bastards. They will call me unfit. They will do anything to diminish her claim." Daemon's lips twitched in a grim smile. "Which is why you staying was so vital. No matter the whispers, your living presence lends weight to the legitimacy of our queen's heirs." He paused, glancing sidelong at Laenor. "But do not fool yourself. War means sacrifice. We cannot flinch at the thought of casualties." The wind carried the sound of distant gulls. Laenor bristled. recalling the cold practicality with which Demon had once suggested that he vanish. Yet he understood the necessity now. If they hesitated, their enemies would crush them. He turned to face Demon. "I will do what I must," Laenor said, voice low. "But I have no taste for slaughter." "Nor do I," Demon replied, though the glint in his eye said otherwise. "But some men deserve it." Below, they heard the commotion of new arrivals. Corlys Velaryon, the sea snake himself, had landed on Dragonstone. As they descended to the courtyard, Laenor felt his heart lift at the sight of his father's familiar figure. Corlys wore rich silks in Velaryon colors, and his white beard caught the sunlight. His face was grim, though he clasped Laenor's arm in a warm greeting. Rhaenys stood with him, relief evident in her eyes at the reunion. Behind them came knights, sailors, and men-at-arms in House Velaryon livery, armed and ready. "Father," Laenor said, fighting the urge to embrace the old man. "Your timing is impeccable." Corlys gave him a tight smile. "We sail under a black banner now, my son. The Greens have made a grave error in dismissing the rightful queen." His gaze swept over the courtyard, noting the sense of urgency. "The narrow sea is ours. No ship can sail in or out of King's Landing without our leave. The Greens will be starved of trade if they do not yield." Rhaenyra joined them, crowned head held high. She acknowledged Corlys with a regal nod. "Lord Corlys, your support means more than I can say, but the Greens will not capitulate easily." He inclined his head. "They will learn that the Velaryons do not break, your grace. My ships are at your command." His voice was strong, carrying the confidence of a man who had navigated seas unknown to lesser sailors. Rhaenys stood by, her lips pressed tight. She, too, had been cheated of the throne once, but now she channeled her ambition into supporting Rhaenyra. With both the Lord of the Tides and the Queen who never was at her side, Rhaenyra had an impressive arsenal. Yet the next steps would be crucial. Every raven that flew from Dragonstone carried pleas or demands. Every breath might herald the approach of war. A week passed in a whirlwind of mustering forces, sending envoys and forging alliances. Rhaenyra dispatched her eldest sons as messengers to key lords, Jacaerys to the Vale, Lucerys to Storm's End, flying on dragonback to remind them of the might the Blacks possessed. Laenor felt a tremor of anxiety watching the boys depart, but he knew that ensuring loyal support from houses Arryn and Baratheon was vital. Dragons had a way of making men remember their oaths. Even as plans unfolded, new dangers arose. Word spread that Aemon Targaryen and Criston Cole led sorties in the Crownlands, attempting to capture or intimidate lesser lords on the fence. Spies whispered that Aegon was a reluctant king, indulging in feasts and wine while Otto governed in his name. Yet the Hightowers still held the keys to the realm's coffers and the might of Old Town. The Tyrells remained ambiguous, balancing between opposing Targaryen claims. Meanwhile, Storm's End was a wild card, and the Westerlands under House Lannister might soon rally to the Greens if they saw advantage. One evening, Corlys convened a war council in Dragonstone's Great Hall. Torches cast flickering light on a large table carved in the shape of Westeros. Rhaenyra sat at its head, flanked by Daemon, Corlys, Rhaenys, and Laenor. Other lords and knights, House Celtigar, House Velaryon bannermen, and loyal Targaryen followers, clustered around, each weighed down by the gravity of the hour. Rhaenyra placed a marker on King's Landing, signifying the Greens. "We cannot assault the city head-on," she declared. "They would shield themselves with small folk, and we cannot risk killing innocents in a siege. Besides, we lack the ground forces to press a decisive victory." "Not yet," Corlys nodded. "A naval blockade could cut off their supplies, as we discussed. But King's Landing is vast. Smugglers will find ways in and out unless we patrol constantly. It would wear down our resources as well." Daemon traced a line across the table, from Dragonstone to Harrenhal. "We could seize Harrenhal to gain a strategic foothold. The Riverlands are likely to flock to our side if we prove strong. From there, we can cut the Green supply lines on land." Laenor studied the map. "We need to draw out their forces in a way that favors our dragons. If they move an army to the Riverlands, we could strike from the air and from the sea. But that means we must coordinate with every ally. A single misstep and the Greens could counter, especially if they secure alliances in the west and the Reach. Rhaenyra's fingers drummed on the table. For now, we wait upon the return of Jace and Luke. Their missions must succeed. If storms end or the Vale stands with us, our position improves greatly. The council continued late into the night, forging contingencies for every scenario. When at last it ended, Laenor retired to his chambers, exhaustion tugging at him. The future weighed upon his shoulders, heavier than any anchor. In the flickering candlelight, he reflected on the journey that had led him here. Had he chosen to disappear into the shadows, living a life of anonymity across the seas, he would be far removed from this gathering storm. But now, standing firm in the realm's greatest conflict, he understood the gravity of his decision. This war was no longer just about a crown, it was about the very soul of Westeros. Days bled into each other, marked by dark skies and thunderous omens. Messengers came and went, bearing tidings both hopeful and dire. On a storm-lashed afternoon, Lucerys returned alone. His eyes were wild, and his face as pale as a ship's sail. He stumbled into the hall, drenched and trembling. Rhaenyra rushed to meet him, and Daemon stood at her side, dread flickering behind his stoic mask. Laenor hovered nearby, heart in his throat. Lucerys told a disjointed tale of Storm's End, of encountering Aemon Targaryen and Vhagar, of escaping with his life by the barest margin. The boy's words were laced with terror. War was not simply a possibility, it was now a reality fueled by blood feuds and dragonfire. In the gloom of that day, Laenor watched Rhaenyra comfort her son, though her own face was etched with fear and anger. The line between life and death had become razor-thin. If Lucerys had fallen, the conflict would escalate beyond recall. But the boy survived, though shaken to the core. Laenor knelt beside him, reassuring him with a steady hand on his shoulder. He did not say how close the boy had come to a dreadful fate. The next time they encountered the Greens, the outcome might be different. Tensions reached new heights as raven after raven brought fresh accounts of smaller skirmishes erupting across the Crownlands. Lords were choosing sides. Some bent the knee to Aegon II, some declared for Queen Rhaenyra, and others tried to remain neutral. The roads were no longer safe. Stories circulated of travelers being robbed or killed for wearing the wrong colors. War crept across Westeros like a slow poison. Even as these grim tidings mounted, Jacaerys returned triumphant, with pledges of support from the Vale and parts of the north. Rhaenyra's eyes lit with renewed hope. If they united the Riverlands under her banner and secured House Aaron's formidable defenses, they might box in King's Landing from multiple fronts. Yet the victory felt fragile. Allies could be swayed by gold or threatened by dragons. All it took was a single betrayal. Laenor found himself in a swirl of preparations. He worked with Corlys to ready the Velaryon fleet for blockade or invasion. He oversaw the training of new recruits from the Narrow Sea Isles, forging them into a disciplined naval contingent. On land, he helped coordinate supply lines, ensuring Dragonstone had enough provisions to outlast a protracted struggle. But with each passing day, the noose around King's Landing tightened, and so did the dread coil within his heart. At last, a raven arrived bearing official word from King's Landing. Aegon II's council demanded Rhaenyra bend the knee, offering partial amnesty in exchange for her surrender. They called Laenor a puppet propping up false heirs. The letter was couched in the language of mercy, yet its threats were unmistakable. If Rhaenyra refused, the crown would brand her a usurper, a traitor to the realm. Laenor burned with anger as he read it. The audacity of the Greens knew no bounds. They crowned a boy who had never been named heir and then demanded the true heir kneel. Rhaenyra summoned her advisors once more. She read the letter aloud, her voice steady though her hand trembled. When she finished, a hush fell. All eyes turned to her, waiting. Gently, she lowered the parchment. So this is how they would style themselves. They claim mercy, yet if we yield, they will ensure we are powerless or worse. We must respond. Daeron Velaryon, a cousin, spat on the floor. They can choke on their mercy. The Iron Throne is yours by right. Daemon's hand drifted to the hilt of Dark Sister. Aegon wants to see us beg. He shall not get the satisfaction. Rhaenyra glanced at Laenor, who stood at her right side. Husband, what say you? He met her gaze. In that moment, every whisper and secret plan, every regret about a simpler life, fell away. He spoke from the core of his being. The Greens cannot be trusted. If we yield, they will strip away our power, our dignity, our very lives in time. We must answer strength with strength. Let it be known that we do not bend, that we will defend the king's last decree. We do not seek to burn the realm, but we will not watch it stolen. A quiet murmur of agreement rippled through the hall. Rhaenyra's eyes flared with determination. She turned to a scribe. Write this: Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen, first of her name, declares the usurper's demands illegitimate. She calls upon all true lords of Westeros to honor the oath they swore to Viserys I, to defend the rightful succession. She breathed out, her voice resonating with newfound authority. We will not bow. The scribe wrote furiously, and the final statement hung in the air like thunder. Thus, the war that historians would call the Dance of the Dragons escalated. No longer were they poised on the brink. The leap had been made, and through it all, Laenor Velaryon stood in the thick of it, neither ghost nor exile, but a man with skin in the game, determined to see this through. In the days that followed, a grim sense of purpose settled over Dragonstone. Messages flew out, knights polished their armor, and supplies were carefully rationed. The Velaryon fleet patrolled the waters, intercepting merchant ships bound for King's Landing, turning them away or commandeering their cargo. Across the sea from the Red Keep, the Greens bristled. Skirmishes with smaller ships broke out near the Gullet. Each clash threatened to escalate into a full-scale naval battle, but Corlys, a master of timing and strategy, refused to commit his entire force until the moment was ripe. Laenor oversaw these maneuvers with a keen eye. He had inherited enough of his father's seafaring brilliance to coordinate blockades and reconnaissance. On more than one occasion, he boarded a longboat to lead a raid on smaller enemy vessels. Word spread among the men that Prince Laenor was no mere figurehead. He fought and strategized with them. Morale soared under his example. Yet for all his outward confidence, Laenor could not dispel the pang of worry for Rhaenyra and the children. Every time the Ravens brought news of a potential confrontation, he feared for Jacaerys and Lucerys, for baby Joffrey, for Baela and Rhaena. Dragon battles could end in a blink of fire and steel. But the lines had been drawn. The realm would bleed no matter how they tried to prevent it. Then came word that a force loyal to the Greens was massing near Rosby, possibly to test the blockade. Daemon volunteered to lead a dragonback sortie to scatter them. Rhaenyra agreed, sending along a detachment of cavalry. For 3 days, the skies over the Crownlands echoed with roars of dragons and the clash of steel. In the end, the Greens fell back, but not without cost. Laenor's face tightened when the casualties were tallied. Dozens dead, more wounded. War was not a single grand battle. It was 1,000 small tragedies knitting themselves into a tapestry of ruin. As the season shifted and autumn winds swept across Blackwater Bay, the prospect of a longer conflict loomed. The realm was fracturing under 2 crowned monarchs. Rhaenyra's alliance-building efforts continued, but so did the Greens. Each side wooed potential supporters with promises of wealth or titles. The nights in Dragonstone were long and anxious, the days a blur of drilling troops, forging new swords, and forging new allegiances. Amidst this turmoil, Laenor and Rhaenyra found moments of fragile connection. They would speak in quiet corners of the castle, reflecting on the bizarre twists of fate. One evening, with the warmth of a brazier warding off the autumn chill, Rhaenyra confided her regrets. Her final days with her father, the slow drift of her youth when the court whispered about her marriage, the heartbreaks and betrayals that had shaped her. Laenor listened, his heart heavy, acknowledging that their union had always been built on duty. But in these uncertain times, they had forged a bond deeper than that. It was not the love of fairy tales, but it was strong, tempered in adversity. She leaned her head against his shoulder, letting out a shaky breath. "I once envied the freedom of those who could marry for passion," she said softly. "Now, I see that our world is built on alliances and broken promises. Perhaps we are more fortunate than most. We understand what is at stake." Laenor pressed his lips into her hair. "I chose to stay. Whatever comes, I choose this. I will not abandon you." The flicker of torchlight danced over her face, revealing a tear glistening at the corner of her eye. She said nothing more, resting in the comfort of his silent vow. Yet outside that room, the war continued to escalate. The Greens launched a bold raid on the outskirts of Crackclaw Point, burning villages that were loyal to Rhaenyra. In retaliation, Daemon and Rhaenys unleashed a devastating dragon assault on the enemy's holdfast, incinerating supply lines meant for King's Landing. The small folk suffered, some aligning with whichever side offered them a scrap of peace. Others fled the Crownlands entirely, seeking refuge in the Vale or the north. Through it all, Laenor coordinated with the Sea Snake on maritime operations, ensuring the capital grew ever more isolated by water. After one particularly intense engagement near Massey's Hook, Laenor returned to Dragonstone exhausted, bearing a new scar where a crossbow bolt had grazed his forearm. Rhaenys examined the wound, her face hardened by experience. "You have done well, my son," she said quietly, binding the cut with linen. "But be wary. The Greens will not accept defeat without a final, desperate strike." Laenor grimaced as she tightened the bandage. "Let them come," he said, though the bravado tasted hollow on his tongue. He had seen men die in these skirmishes. He knew how easily fortune could turn. On a morning thick with fog, the watchman on the ramparts of Dragonstone spotted a lone skiff approaching under a flag of truce. Word traveled swiftly, and soon Rhaenyra, flanked by her most trusted advisors, stood on the shore to greet the unknown emissary. The small boat glided closer, revealing a single figure cloaked in green. Laenor stood beside Rhaenyra, hand on the hilt of his sword. The tension was palpable. Who would dare come under a green banner to the Black Queen's domain? As the figure disembarked, the wind tugged back the hood to reveal Ser Criston Cole. A hush fell, thick with the weight of old resentments. Ser Criston bowed stiffly. "My queen," he said in a cold, formal tone, though the address bristled with contempt. "I bring a final message from King Aegon II." He held out a sealed letter, his eyes flicking to Laenor, then away, as though recalling every slight and rumor that once festered in the halls of the Red Keep. Rhaenyra's voice was steady. "Give it to me." She broke the seal, scanning the lines quickly. Her grip on the parchment tightened, and she read aloud for the benefit of those around her. "The so-called Princess Rhaenyra is ordered to stand down under pain of treason and deliver herself to King's Landing for a public trial. The lords and knights who follow her may be spared should they renounce their loyalty to the pretender. If she does not comply, war shall be waged upon her, her children, and her allies without mercy." A low growl emanated from Daemon, who was present with his hand on Dark Sister. Corlys clenched his jaw, while Rhaenys' eyes flashed with fury. Laenor felt the chill of impending violence crawl up his spine. The writing was on the wall. There would be no peace, no negotiation. The Greens demanded subjugation, not compromise. Ser Criston's expression remained impassive. "His Grace offers a choice. Bend the knee and live, or defy him and perish. I was bid to warn you that any further acts of aggression will be met with the full might of the crown." He paused, as though tasting the bitterness of his own words. "Make your decision now, or suffer the consequences." Rhaenyra drew herself up to her full height, the crown glinting in the murky daylight. "You stand upon the soil of Dragonstone, addressing Queen Rhaenyra, the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. I will not yield to those who stole my birthright." Ser Criston stiffened. "Then your answer is war." A hush descended. No one spoke. In that moment, Laenor caught the flicker in Rhaenyra's eyes. Something final, resigned yet defiant. She lifted her chin. "Return to the usurper," she said, voice ringing with authority. "Tell him I will never bend the knee to a false king." "The next time we meet, Ser Criston, do not come bearing a flag of truce, for we shall no longer heed it." Criston Cole's lips pressed into a thin line. He bowed, less graciously this time, and turned to depart. Laenor stared after him, old memories mingling with fresh anger. The lines had been clearly drawn. There would be no quarter given. As the skiff pulled away into the mist, Laenor felt the full weight of his decision to remain in Westeros. This was not a mere succession dispute, it was a war of annihilation. The Greens and the Blacks would clash until one side lay broken. In the weeks that followed, hostilities escalated to new heights. The blockade around King's Landing tightened, with the Velaryon fleet seizing or sinking any ship flying green banners. Aegon's supporters tried multiple times to break through, but each attempt was thwarted by the superior seamanship of the Velaryons. On land, small-scale battles erupted in the Riverlands, with some lords switching allegiance mid-conflict. The cost in blood rose daily. Rhaenyra, though heavily burdened, proved resolute. She held councils of war, sending out dragon riders to rally loyalist lords. Daemon captured Harrenhal, using it as a forward base to cut off green reinforcements from the west. Corlys threatened to sail up the Blackwater Rush and blockade the city from both sides. Yet the Greens refused to yield. Aemond took to the skies with Vhagar, striking fear into the hearts of the Crownlands. Alicent and Otto remained entrenched in the Red Keep, orchestrating diplomatic overtures to the Lannisters and Tyrells. Aegon himself grew erratic, indulging in feasts and dalliances when not forced to show himself as a king of war. One dark evening, Laenor stood on Dragonstone's walls, watching the flicker of distant fires. Somewhere across the bay, men were dying, their screams lost in the wind. He rested his hands on the cold stone, exhaling a breath that misted in the chill air. In the courtyard below, soldiers sharpened swords by torchlight, the sparks illuminating grim faces. When he closed his eyes, he recalled a life he might have led, a life of quiet anonymity across the narrow sea, free from the burdens of crowns and wars. But that had been an illusion. He had chosen this, chosen to stand with Rhaenyra and to uphold his house's honor. He could not run from it. Footsteps approached, and he turned to see Rhaenyra. She wore a heavy cloak lined with fur, a small diadem resting on her pale hair. Her eyes shone with a weariness that matched his own. She joined him at the wall, gazing out over the dark waters. For a time, they said nothing. At last, she spoke, voice muted by the wind. "I feel as though every day, a piece of me dies along with the men who perish in my name. Yet to yield would betray all my father stood for. War has a way of stripping us bare, revealing who we truly are." Laenor nodded slowly. "Yet, if we do not fight, everything we hold dear is forfeit. I wish there was another path, but the Greens have left us none." She turned to him, eyes shining with unshed tears. "At least you remained. The realm will know that House Velaryon and House Targaryen stood together, that we tried to hold on to what was rightfully ours. I'm grateful." Gently, he reached for her hand. "I made my choice. Let there be no regrets." Their fingers intertwined, and in that moment, the bond they had forged through adversity felt like the only stable rock in a sea of turmoil. Above them, the sky roiled with storm clouds, and lightning illuminated the fortress's ancient spires. The wind carried the sound of distant thunder, a fitting herald for a conflict that would soon consume the Seven Kingdoms in flame and blood. Yet Laenor stood firm at Rhaenyra's side, heart steeled by a sense of purpose he had once thought foreign to him. No matter how dark the days ahead, he would not abandon his vow nor the realm he had chosen to defend. And so, beneath the storm-racked skies of Dragonstone, the battle lines were set, and the dance of the dragons would rage on, forever shaped by the choice Laenor Velaryon had made, to live, to fight, and to stand beside his queen when the realm needed him most.